Hey, welcome. It's Brian, and today we are going to go over a top 50 list of some of the best all time jazz guitar players according to this website, uDiscovermusic. This is an interesting website. They are all over the map, from talking about Disney music to doing cool lists like this, and some avant-garde music as well as rap, pop, all of that. So it sounds like they are a go-to website for a lot of different music. They happen to have a couple of lists, and I thought it'd be fun to do that. I have my own lists, but it's always neat to be comparative and see where you fit. And you're welcome to also check this website out. Like I said, it's uDiscovermusic. Never heard of it till I randomly had something pop up a couple of days ago talking about the top 50 jazz guitar players of all time. So, with that said, I'm mostly from a fusion background, more modern jazz players. As far as traditional players or old school kind of jazz players, I'm definitely familiar with Jim Hall, Kenny Burrell, obviously Wes Montgomery, Charlie Christian, Grant Green. Some of those I can't say I've listened to a lot of those players outside of Jim Hall, and I know there's many, many more. Kenny Burrell is a favorite of mine for sure. So he did some records with Coltrane and other stuff. Obviously, lots of his own records under his own name, and he always, to me, had a great kind of bluesy feel and kind of context in his playing that I really, really liked. So, with that said, we're going to start at 50 with John Pizzarelli. That is his dad was Bucky Pizzarelli, famous jazz player. I know the name. I've seen him play. Obviously, if you're into straight ahead stuff, he's the guy. He's been playing probably as long as I have been, so probably 30, 40 years at this point. So great player. Not my kind of thing, but cool. Norman Brown is kind of like if I'm not incorrect, he's kind of like a soul jazz, kind of, maybe he's a bopper, I don't know, kind of in that George Benson sense. Great player, heard him a couple of times. Again, not my thing. Mary Osborne, unfortunately, I've never heard of her, so past that. Russell Malone is someone I know. He's more of a straight ahead player, a younger player than some of the older school guys, but he's roughly around my age, close to 60, and has played with a lot of pop acts and kind of straight ahead things. I can't say I know much about him, but yeah. Next is Emily Remler, who was an incredible player and unfortunately died in her mid 30s while on tour, I think in Australia or something like that. But she had a really interesting approach, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've listened to her. Kind of like steeped in the tradition of jazz guitar, but kind of bringing more modern kind of modal approaches and stuff like that. But that was my opinion of her, and I haven't really listened to her for a long time. Number 45 is Charlie Hunter. Charlie's one of these guys that's always kind of confused me a little bit because really unique player, kind of cool, always had the fan frets, and he would do the bass line and kind of the comping and all of this kind of thing. He was in a really great band called TJ Hooker, and I'm going to blank on the other guitar player's name, but that guy was smoking. And that was a really, really cool band. I, however, have seen Charlie a couple of times. I think it's cool-ish, and it just never really gelled with me. He's a great player, all of that, but it's just never my thing. 44, Kurt Rosenwinkel. Yeah, I've heard of him. He's definitely on that new end of players that's kind of bringing more, kind of pop sensibilities in a way, or kind of reinterpreting old kind of pop songs and kind of making him his own kind of deal. Interesting stuff. I can't say I've listened to him a lot. Him, and the next one is Julian Log, or is it Ledge? I don't know how do you pronounce his last name. But he is obviously a huge player in that kind of more straight ahead kind of jazz guitar playing. But I've seen him do a lot of stuff that's more into that realm of maybe like a Bill Frisell or something like that. Again, both Kurt Rosenwinkel and Julian I have not listened to that much. Kurt, I think I actually have a couple of records, but it's been a while. Earl Klug was a huge player, did tons of, I think, session work and stuff like that, and was kind of in that super tasteful, kind of like jazz ish kind of music, like instrumental stuff. But he definitely had a ton of chops and played with a lot of people. And I would say he kind of comes from that George Benson kind of approach, and at least in how he presented music, not necessarily in playing. So it's been a long time since I've listened to him as well. James Blood Ulmer, I definitely am acquainted with. That's the kind of stuff I do listen to or have listened to. It's the kind of stuff I've played. And James Blood Ulmer, when he is on, is incredible. The Revelation Music Ensemble, that band that he was in, is great. He's got a lot of cool records. I've seen him a couple of times. And then he has some stuff where he does more, what's it, like where he's singing and stuff, kind of almost like blues based stuff. That was not my favorite. So, yeah, James Blood Ulmer, great player. I like that kind of stuff for sure. Number 40 is Eric Gale. Not Eric Gales, which when I saw this, I thought it was him. This person, unfortunately, has passed away in the mid 90s. And he looks like he did some stuff with BB King and something like that. More of a funk R&B player. Eddie Lang is a super old player. Obviously, kind of in that Charlie Christian era, if I'm correct, or maybe a little bit after. But Django Reinhardt, they're saying, Eddie Lang was the father of jazz guitar. I can't say I know anything about him outside that. I've seen pictures of him, and he was playing in the 30s. He died very young, 31. So that kind of probably halted a lot of things for him if he was actually the father of jazz guitar. Which I always thought it would be Charlie Christian, to be honest. But I think Eddie Lang might be before him, so maybe that's the deal. But he probably should have lived longer and probably would have had more stuff. Next at 38 is Larry Carlton. Great player, did tons of session work. I know him mostly from Steely Dan and some of his records that he put out in the 80s, late 80s probably. I liked him then. He was a great player, super tasteful, very sophisticated, obviously, in how he approaches guitar and music. He definitely kind of falls into those contemporaries of players I did like, which is like Steve Kahn, Lee Ritenour. Steve Kahn I really liked a lot. And I listened to all of them, but Steve Kahn is the one I still listen to quite a bit. So anyway, Larry Carlton, definitely. I'm going to mispronounce this, but I know the name Laurindo Alameda, and he, I believe, is from Brazil, and he did a lot of, Brazilian music on guitar. And I just remember him from, Guitar Player a long time ago. Next is 36 is George Van Epps, another straight ahead player, died in the mid 90s, but played with lots of stuff in the 40s and 50s, like the Andrew Sisters and stuff like that, and Stan Kenton's band. So definitely in that traditional straight ahead era of playing. Number 35 is a big person in my life as far as guitar playing, is Sonny Sharrock. His band with Elvin Jones, Shawnette Moffett, and I'm forgetting what other, was incredible. Ask the Ages. I had a band named that. He did a record with, I think he did a record with Coltrane and Miles, but I don't know if that's actually true. I'm kind of misremembering it. But he was in lots of bands. He did Last Exit with Bill Laswell, Peter Brotzman, and Ronald Shannon Jackson. That band, very, very aggressive, very loud, and Sonny was incredible. I always he's like a great mix of like a James Blood Ulmer, and then he kind of has that really melodic sense like a Carlos Santana. So kind of, he unfortunately died too early as well in his mid 50s. I happened to see him once or twice and was always kind of great and entertaining. Next is Howard Roberts, who definitely, I just know him as being a big session guy. And then in the mid 80s and 90s, he was in Guitar Player, talking about theory and stuff like that. He's actually from the Pacific Northwest, or I think he is. I think his son, who I'm forgetting his name, lived in the Seattle area for a long time. So, anyway, great player. Don't know much about him, but he was definitely famous for session stuff. Now, 33, Kevin Eubanks, incredible player. He was in the Late Show band, the Jay Leno band, excuse me, forever. And as a guitar player, he did a record with Dave Holland that most players who love kind of cool, aggressive kind of fusion or whatever you want to say it will know Extensions, the Dave Holland record. And Kevin is incredible on that. And I think he's a player that doesn't really get recognized a lot, although he was on national television in front of millions of people, 5 nights a week. He did a lot of solo records. The first one that I bought or was kind of this cool acoustic one that was like in the vein of kind of Mahavishnu Orchestra as far as composition and stuff. So I'll just never forget all of those intros and outros to the Tonight Show. He would be playing like Led Zeppelin or something, a rock standard, and just be killing it. So he's a great player. Bill Connors, of course, was like a fusion guy. He took over for Al Di Meola into Return to Forever, essentially, is how I always thought it. He had some cool solo records, kind of like he had a little bit of the tonality or that legato technique that Holsworth had. He didn't have that compositional sense. He wasn't stealing from him, but had a little bit of glimmer of that. Great player. 31, Steve Kahn. I love Steve Kahn. His band with Anthony Jackson, Steve Jordan on drums, that trio, and then there was always a percussionist or something. He did a couple of records, I think under the name Eyewitness is the name of the band. There was 3 or 4 records there that I really, really liked, and he did tons of session work as well. And his father was Sammy Kahn, the composer, and I think Steve changed his name, spelling or something, so he could do his own thing. At 30, Lee Ritenour. He's had some great moments. I've listened to a little bit, but it's not something I really listen to a lot. Pat Martino is a genius, and if you don't know anything about Pat, he had an aneurysm in the 80s and forgot everything about guitar, and he plays a lot of notes. So initially that was a little bit hard for me to get over, but as I listened to him talk, he had this whole diminished matrix approach to guitar, and I just love when anyone can take that intellectual power, like a Holsworth or something, and they kind of come up with their theories. And maybe it wasn't his theory exactly. I've seen stuff like that mentioned in other people's books. But anyway, great player, and his story is incredible because of the whole aneurysm thing. And he came back. He had a great trio with Harvey Swartz on bass and Joey Barron on drums, and they were smoking. Again, Pat at that time there was a lot of notes. So cool approach to guitar for sure. Ralph Towner, don't know tons of his stuff. I'm trying to think of the band. I'm sure he'll say in here. Oh, he was a founder of the band Oregon. I've listened to them. I think he basically exclusively played nylon string acoustic, or maybe just acoustic, period, but I don't think he was an electric player. Always had some neat elements. The band Oregon had some great ECM records that I listened to. Very pastoral, very, not my thing in certain ways. So, number 27, The Amazing John Abercrombie. He had a couple of records that I really, really loved. I think it was called Currents or something like that, kind of a trio. But really cool approach to guitar. It really, when I was listening to that a lot, it kind of informed me a lot. So, great fusion player. Next is another player, Bill Frisell. I've seen many, many, many times living in the Seattle area. He moved there roughly right after I did, and I got to see him so many times. He might be the person I've seen the most in my life as far as my favorite guitar players. My favorite record of his was Where in the World, and Before You Were Born was the first one I bought, and that was kind of out there. Actually, I bought Smashing Scatteration in the late 80s, and that was a duo record with him and Vernon Reid with an 808 drum machine. I did not like that record. I've not revisited it, so I could be wrong now, but he was also in Power Tools with Melvin Gibbs and I think Ronald Shannon Jackson on drums. Kind of a band with like a great pedigree. The record, okay, it could have been, I think live they would have been incredible. And I've happened to see Bill in many different formulations. Next, we have Freddie Green, basically a straight ahead player from the 40s and 50s, I believe. I don't know anything about him. Herb Ellis is another guy that is probably a straight ahead player. Played with Oscar Peterson, so you know he's got tons of chops. Great player. Next, we have the amazing Al Di Meola, which I'm very acquainted with. I love a lot of stuff he did in the 70s, obviously. In the 80s, kind of trailed off. And, had a few things here and there that I liked, but definitely an iconic player in my book. Lenny Brow, a great player who brought a lot of cool techniques to guitar, always played nylon string, an incredible, thoughtful player. I can't say I've listened to a lot of his playing, though. So, next is Mike Stern, who I've seen many times and was a huge fan of his stuff in Miles Davis and his earlier solo stuff. I'm a huge fan of that, bought all of those. Haven't really heard anything from him in a while, but anyway. John Scofield, another big player for me. I loved his early trio works on Enya with Adam Nussbaum and Steve Swallow, he's done lots of records with John. And there's that record, and I'm trying to think of the record that he won the Grammy for. I should know it, but it was kind of a cool record with a different rhythm section. But there's two records that really stand out for me that I really like, and that's the one with Bill Frisell, the duo record, and then the other one's the one with Pat Metheny, which is like, I think it's called I Can See Your House From Here or something like that. Those two records I really, really loved. And then there was the stuff, A Go Go. That was kind of a really popular record. I like that one a lot. I listened to John, that Miles era and his early era stuff. Again, he was on Miles Records, I believe on Star People, You're Under Arrest, and there's one more in there that I'm forgetting. So, cool records. So, with his playing really adds some dimension to it, or whatever you want to say. Number 19, Charlie Bird, straight ahead player. I think mostly nylon string player. Never got into him. Alan Holdsworth was huge for me. I loved his mid 70s stuff with Tony Williams' Lifetime, UK, Bill Bruford, his earlier solo stuff, and a lot of that. He did, I think, 2 or 3 records with Chad Wackerman. Incredible. Some of my favorite playing is on those Chad Wackerman records, and then of course Secrets was a huge one. But with that said, I think I bought everything from IOU till, what was the Winding Cliff Tower one, maybe? I bought all of those. That was after Secrets, so huge player. Larry Coryell, although he lived in Seattle and like that, I never really knew much about him, except I had one record with him and Joe Beck and John Abercrombie called Tributaries, I think, or something like that. So they're all playing acoustic guitar. Super great record. Love it. And really, really love that record a lot. They do Equinox, the Coltrane piece, and some other stuff, and really neat. But recently, while doing this channel, I watched Larry Coryell and his band. What was the 70s kind of fusion band, 11 House. And they were, I don't know if they were before Mahavishnu Orchestra, but they were pretty close. And although he is not as technical as like John McLaughlin, some really cool stuff. I really, really liked that band. And I just started listening to that like in the last couple of years. So, huge fusion fan. I just never, kind of was drawn to him. Next is Jimmy Rainey, another straight ahead player, incredible player. I have watched him a little bit, and again, that's not my thing. So hey, all of these people deserve to be on here for from my point of view. John McLaughlin, of course, is huge for me, starting with his solo stuff, and then Miles stuff, and then Mahavishnu Orchestra to Shakti. I just saw Shakti. I've seen John quite a few times as well. But I definitely am more in that late 60s, 70s stuff for sure. Here's another one that's bizarre that I haven't listened to, and that's Gabor Szabo. And I know Carlos Santana would talk about him all the time, and I never really checked it out. So maybe that's something down the road. Jimmy Smith is another great player. He did a lot of trio records with like organ trio stuff, I believe. I haven't really listened to him at all. Stanley Jordan, definitely knew him when he first came out. I thought incredible player, and then he is someone that was kind of messed with record companies because the first record, or maybe it was the second record, Al Di Meola produced it. It got so big, there was nowhere to go, and his technique, while being super unique, some of that stuff was great, and then he went on to do records that were not very good. So I kind of lost interest, to be honest, after the first one, and I'm forgetting what it's called, but it had him on the front playing that Travis Bean guitar, the one with the aluminum neck. So anyway, obviously super influential player, because we had Eddie Van Halen and other people tapping the neck. I'm going to say Eddie, and then Stanley Jordan started to do the chordal approach, which I kind of see more now. Tapping and all of that stuff is a huge part of modern guitar playing, whereas before Stanley Jordan and Eddie Van Halen, it was there's little spurts of it here and there. Billy Gibbons or whoever, doing little moments of tapping, Frank Zappa, stuff like that. So there's definitely examples of that kind of playing before those two, but they kind of really pushed it. Next at 11 is Tal Farlow, another straight ahead player. Can't say I know anything about him. I mean, he was playing with Benny Goodman and stuff like that, or after that era. So I think Charlie Christian influenced him, and then he went on to be more of a straight ahead player in the 50s. Pat Metheny, one of the most amazing composers, musicians of our time. I love a lot of his solo work. There's little spurts and spatters of stuff of his I totally love, and then there's some that I don't. So I think he's such a unique guitar player that he is, and this isn't ranked really, but he would definitely be in my top 10 fusion players. Pat Metheny. Joe Pass, definitely listen to, definitely an iconic player, really interesting like approach to thinking about music and playing guitar, and a virtuoso. I personally don't listen to that kind of thing. Again, I've said this many times already, but not my thing. Next is Kenny Burrell. Told you I love him. Great bluesy-ish player. Had a lot of soul to his playing, and I always liked him. Barney Kessel, another straight-ahead player. He, I think, did a lot of session work and stuff, and a lot of those guys did. They probably played on tons of records if they were any good. Again, don't know much about him. Grant Green, another kind of straight-ahead player, but he did kind of a lot of chordal stuff. A lot of these guys are really big chordal type players that are from that older tradition, from the bop era to probably mid 60s. Lots of technique, but just kind of a completely different approach. Whereas Jim Hall took his records with Bill Evans, and just his way of playing like more intervallically, like hinting at chords with kind of two notes or three notes, or just how he approached it, more ventilated, without doing a lot of big chord stuff. I mean, that directly influenced everybody from Scofield, Mike Stern, Pat Metheny, Mick Goodrick. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing, but he was kind of that bridge almost. And I'm sure there's others, but that's the one I think of as a bridge from kind of that traditional straight ahead jazz playing to more fusion type stuff. Next is George Benson, who is probably out of all of these the one that has sold the most records. He has chops through the roof. Great player. Um, again, out of a lot of these, I am not listening to a lot of his stuff, but I always stop and listen if I saw something like a video of it or something like that. Number four is Jim Hall. He was around for a long time, and at the end of his life, he was using the whammy pedal and some cool effects, and he was just a really neat guy. And if you play guitar, I had 2 or 3 videotapes of players that were like those Starlix things, instructional tapes, and one was Jim Hall and the other was Steve Morris, and that's the only ones I ever really bought. And the Jim Hall one was really neat. I did have a John Abercrombie one too as well. So Charlie Christian, um, they're calling him a true jazz revolutionary. I totally agree. Again, Eddie Lang died at 31, and Charlie Christian died at 25 from tuberculosis. So, had those two guys kind of went on, I think they would have been even more well known now. And of course, we have Django Reinhardt as number two. We all know his story. Incredible virtuosic player with incredible, like, basically physical disabilities, but still really imaginative and a great player. Number one is Wes Montgomery. We can all thank him for the kind of octave thumb stuff. And that's just the easy thing to talk about. He had an amazing groove and just incredible sense of melody and just like the perfect player. Like he had it all and he was cool. And I think he, of course, died too young. He was born in 23, died in 68. So what is that? 35? Wow. So 3 iconic players in the top, 50. Wes Montgomery, what was the next? Charlie Christian, Eddie Lang, all died before 35. Django Reinhardt lived till he was 43. So, anyway, hey, I'm Brian. I just wanted to go over this list. What are your favorite players? I'd love to know yours. I can think of a few that fell through, but not many. This kind of list was great. Of course, I don't know the straight ahead players. That's probably my blind spot for this kind of thing, but I thought I would do it. And hopefully, this is something you kind of enjoy. And I definitely would have my list. I would do far less than 50. I would do maybe 15. That's always a good number for me. Because I can always think of 10, like instantaneous. But then there's these other 5. Like Borelli Lagrange, he was like a protege. Well, he's not a protege of Django, but in the probably early 80s at 14 and 15 he was doing records and he was incredible. And then the stuff I'm drawn to though is he did 2 basically fusion records, Inferno, and there's one more and I'm forgetting it, but both were really cool. Dennis Chambers, all sorts of great players on there and all of that. But that Inferno record was huge for me, and I still like it till today. I listen to it occasionally. So incredible player that wasn't mentioned on here. Um, I'm Brian. I mostly do guitar-based stuff and reaction stuff, but starting to do more lists, starting to talk about my thoughts, my passions as far as a guitar player. So I appreciate you joining me, and please come back for more. All right.